Click. So, this is the second part of the Samina Rabina Chakra. Today is the 21st of December, 2000 of the 14th of the 12th year. My name is Vadim Zaporozhsov, Mikhail Kolesnik and I, so we are conducting this seminar. So, we stopped at the questions. There were some questions there, and then we lost contact.
Yes, there are two questions.
And let's answer these questions, and go further. Yeah, come on, read me the questions. While looking for questions, who has any questions in the audience? Does anyone understand anything? Today, Misha and I discussed what other practice to give you, Pash, on Chuk. There is generally a great practice to hammer a nail into the wall with the third eye with your head. Preferably with this hat to the wall. Yes, I found a question. Anna Zhishny. When a person's Ajna chakra function improves, how does it manifest itself in his daily life? And how can this be understood from the outside? Which means? Yes, here's the question. What does it mean it's getting better? Look, this is the ideology here. So, we remember when the world was created. First there was the principle of reason. Well, there were a lot of things there before that. And then the principle of reason, the principle of space, and so on. Up to the principle of the earth were created. The same thing, friends, happens when you are born in this universe. That is, when you enter this world. This process is identical to the process of creation of the universe. Only your small inner universe. And you begin to create your own principle of mind, the principle of space, and so on. And then, your personal principle of space is, as it were, docked with the universal principle of space. But it remains in such a latent or dormant state. In primitive forms of animals, and as evolution progresses, development goes, as it were, directly in the opposite direction. That is, it was created from the principle of reason to the principle of the earth, and in evolutionary terms. Development and mastery goes in the opposite direction, from the principle of the earth to the principle of reason. Thus, there are living beings that you will not find in our understanding of the mind. Some kind of creatures. In short, the infusoria is a slipper, friends. You will find living beings who, in general, have a central or whatever it is, a nervous system already. And in general, at least some first glimpses of cell differentiation. Cells on cells, their say, body cells, nerve cells have already been observed. Then there are living beings who already have this structure, more or less organized, say, an earthworm. It cannot be said that he is a great intellectual, but he shows a certain intelligence. But in any case, what is instinct? Instinct is some kind of initial information that has been somehow mastered, taken into account, and which is then applied. That is, the first basics or the first glimpses of reason. Well, I'm not going to have such complicated topics now, but even simpler topics. And here. Then we have with you there, let's say there are animals, birds, cats, dogs. But they also have a mind, friends. There is a mind. Yes, he is not up to human about something, but in his own way, the mind is very strong. Then we have people with you. People are different too, you know. There are people who are not distinguished by special intelligence, right? And there are people who have intelligence rushing out of all the cracks. Here. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. So, in fact, we are, as they say, building a more and more perfect system, using the principle of reason, or Ajna chakra. That's the moment when we fully, 100% use one or another principle, achieve perfection. This moment, it says, is identical to the fact that you have fully mastered the chakra, put it under control, and learned to use it 100%. But it happens in different ways. That is, roughly speaking, everyone has the same Ajna chakra. Only we are aware of it in different ways and have different ways to use it. So, what is the distinguishing feature of the fact that a person has learned to use the principle of reason, or the Ida chakra? First of all, he shows his intellectual power strong. This is the criterion by which you can evaluate. But how is it visible to others? Well, according to the degree to which this power is strong. In general, this is the way to talk about how this or that chakra works. That sometimes I hear such nonsense, they say, this person's Ajna chakra is closed. What do they mean by that? Or there, his Anahata is closed. Oh Panky! Is it that he has no tactile sensations, or what? Well, you know, it's a matter of terminology. Therefore, since it is now a young science, the adaptation of knowledge, therefore there is no such vocabulary that has been formed. And sometimes there is this substitution of concepts. So, was there another question? Now, just a second. Therefore, it manifests itself as intellectual power and strength. Therefore, if we begin to get smarter, then one way or another, we will activate the Ajna chakra. And it can be seen even from the outside. Well, that is what I want to say. If some smart guy comes and says that he has Ajna chakra, it means that it is awakened. The third eye is open. Everyone, the third eye's open everything, and at the same time, he is stupid as a stump. Then you have to understand that there is either one or the other. You know, the third eye is open, and you're a fool. So either the third eye is closed. So, yes. Question, right. Yes, there was a question. Once again, I answered you. Our personal principle of reason, which is formed at birth, is again not the human mind, but our prince, not the anti-prince. In general, we got confused with the terminology here, in my opinion. No, look, one more time. When the universe was created, one of the first principles that the Absolute created was the principle of reason. Then, the Absolute created us in his image and likeness. Each of our births is equivalent to the creation of our small personal inner universe. And there, too, everything begins with the principle of reason. Then these principles are integrated, mind on mind and space on space, and so on to the principle of the earth. And we have an embodied body when our inner universe is connected to the outer universe. Or our microcosm is connected to the macrocosm. Here, that's what is meant. Okay, now, just a second. Yes, one at a time. Yes.
I have such a question. If in the yoga of dreams or in the nidra of yoga, we concentrate just on the jina, on the chakra, and in dream yoga, for example, do we pass through it into another space, like the space of dreams, for example?
Well, there are actually different techniques. Sometimes, on the contrary, he advises to focus on the throat center when falling asleep, on the principle of space is considered. That's the question. Look, in such yogas, such as dream yoga, there is a slightly different principle involved. Your task is to introduce prana into the central channel. As soon as you have to have a surplus of prana for this. If you don't have an excess of prana, you will never get a lucid dream. So, the first is an excess of prana. The second is a combination of factors, when this excess is somehow directly or indirectly introduced into the central channel. And, in fact, each of the chakras has a hole through which prana can be injected into the central channel. And four different techniques, for different means and purposes, different chakras are used. Of course, since we have the principle of reason, it is higher than the principle of space, respectively, controls. Then some things are much easier to do from the level of Ajna than lower principles. This, by the way, applies to everything else. And the remaining other practices, and the remaining other chat. That's right, there was another question. Yes. From whom? I have. Yes. Now. Yeah, just a second. Come on, come on.
And about how the mind works, how to develop the mind.
Yes.
Let's say, well, it is generally known that many people work with reason precisely through concentration.
Yes.
And the question is this: if we concentrate exactly like this, it is in this plan that we work with the mind, will we break it to such an extent that there will be no need to engage in logical thinking?
Yes, absolutely right. You have noticed very well. Patanjali's system is based on this. So, there is the so-called Yoga Sutra Patanjali, the eightfold system of Patanjali or Ashtanga system, and the barbell is 8, where just at certain stages, the last 3 stages, which together are called sanyama, offer you to approach the achievement of superstate through working with the mind through concentration.
Подойти к достижению сверхсостояния через работу с разумом посредством концентрации.
That is, when you hold only one object or idea in your mind and do not pay attention to others. Gradually, the degree of your attention and concentration is growing. You can do this only in one case: your principle of reason develops or hones in direct proportion. Therefore, strictly speaking, to a certain extent, it is possible to equate the sharpening of the mind with the ability to concentrate and hold one's thought on one object or phenomenon. Here, imagine you are studying there somewhere, as in my case it was there. I entered MEFI after school. And there's a completely different load after school, and higher mathematics went. And she went, you know, such a good higher mathematics went. Not bad. I don't know how it is now. Then higher mathematics went very well, starting with such completely abstract concepts, moments, and so on. And I remember, there was a blow to the brain. I did not graduate from physics and mathematics schools. I graduated from an ordinary school in a provincial city, thousands of kilometers from the capital. You understand, right? And then such a blow, you know, to the brain. And what worked? That despite the load, you still keep your mind on one thing. At the expense of prana, at the expense of excess prana, you concentrate, meditate, reflect on one topic. And due to this, I managed to reduce the failures in education at the time. They were very big, because I didn't study there at all until the 8th grade. I walked and ran around the fields and fields there, I don't know, I led a free lifestyle there. You know how it is, Tom Sawyer. Here. And then it became necessary to study, and the missed years must be compensated somehow. And so it was necessary to compensate for them precisely by concentrating. That is, since you're watching, you don't understand. You don't understand. Attention starts jumping, getting distracted. It's hard for him to be on one. Well, it's hard, you know what? The first time you see, you don't understand, and so on. Consciousness jumps. That's if something. Look here, then the second step. Then you get used to it. And already these formulas, all these integrals, differentials there, and so on no longer seem so scary. Take this. Open some textbook of higher mathematics, but you will be horrified that there is a Chinese letter drawn there. And then it ceases to be a Chinese letter, but on the contrary, it caresses the eye. The gaze caresses. That is, you get used to it. Why? Because you keep your attention for a long time, and over time the habituation goes. As soon as there is a habit of retention, the meaning slowly begins to reach. Because, according to the axiomatics of yoga, if you hold your consciousness by concentrating on any object or phenomenon, that is, any object or phenomenon fully shows its content to the consciousness that is directed at it. Strictly speaking, the process of thinking, and the thought of education is a process that allows you to keep consciousness on the selected object of the phenomenon. And the answer that we get to the question, it comes through thoughts due to the degree of concentration.
через мысли за счет степени концентрации.
And so it turns out, here the sign of equality stands between the ability to concentrate and the ability to develop the Ajna chakra. If you are able to concentrate and hold your consciousness on any chosen arbitrary object or phenomenon for more than 3 hours, as it is written in some books on yoga, you enter a superconscious state, the so-called state of samadhi. This is just a harbinger of what we talked about at the beginning of the seminar. After that, the next stage of higher intuition or direct comprehension begins. Here, therefore, it is absolutely correct, due to the concentration of consciousness, due to the concentration of attention. You indirectly begin to hone the mind. How is this achieved in schools and institutes? You take a book, go to the library, sit down, wherever no one interferes with you, open it and force yourself to concentrate. Different periods pass. Sometimes there comes, the effect of a white sheet. You seem to be reading, but it seems to you that you are reading. Your thoughts have flown somewhere. You have to catch this moment and return it. Your thoughts are like monkeys jumping, and you are theirs. Like cockroaches are spreading, and you're raking them. As soon as concentration on a chosen object, phenomenon, formula, say in mathematics, or an idea, reaches a certain stability, objects or phenomena are comprehended by you, and you acquire knowledge. You understand, right? Here. So yes? And then, in general, Patanjali begins wonderfully. Here we were talking about a wolf today, which was driven with the help of red rags, poor, and shot at the corners. Here. And in Patanjali, in fact, the negative effect of our karma on us, he reduced with mathematical precision to the situation with the wolf. That is, in fact, all the action of our negative karma just goes according to the scenario when we are faced with a new situation. But because of negative experience, we begin to confuse it with the old situation that led to suffering. We already start behaving incorrectly in the new situation. And thus we only make our condition heavier. And it turns out that due to the concentration of meditation on one selected object or phenomenon, you can significantly weaken the so-called sanskaras, or these little flags, with which I am already driving your way to the slaughter. And you can, like that old wolf, jump, and run away, so into the free forests. This is called a liberation situation. Now, if you jump over all these rags, you will reach the state of Jivan Mukta, free during your lifetime. You will no longer have any sanskara imprints on the surface of your mind. Mizaya, the good one. Poor Mizaya. What's that? I drank it all up. Here. So this is a very good remark, parallel with yoga in the morning and shuk. Someone else had something. Yes, please. It is this term purity of mind that is polluted. Yes, purity of mind, yes, and here are the questions. Who is in touch with us? Friends, do you remember?
The concentration is on you. Kansan.
Okay, fine. So, look. The biggest one. The big problem I faced in yoga is the lack of adequate vocabulary. Lack of adequate definitions. Yes, let's say we don't translate the word yoga. Yoga remained. But let's say the word reason. We say reason. We suspect our mind. Well, now each of you has a mind. Here. For us, we put a sign of reason. Mind, brain. We're not brainless idiots out there, are we? Yes. Here. And so on. But when you begin to explore these structures, What we call the mind is divided into three parts. Manas, as if, buddhi and chitta. That's exactly the same with the concepts of pollution purity. Well, let's start with the fact that there is nothing clean and nothing dirty in this world. It can be appropriate or inappropriate. The sand on the beach is appropriate and clean. The same sand on the hostess's kitchen table or in your soup chowder pollutes her. You understand, right? That is, the question is where is that sometimes? A matter of dirt and cleanliness. This is on the one hand. That is, when you are full of impressions, your mind is full of idiotic impressions. Well, there are people who are insane. This is what they have in the jungle. There is a jungle in their head. Sometimes such people come to us to study and, well, there's a double job. First, these jungles need to be cut down, and they are not so easy to cut down. There are also dangerous tigers there. Here. And then so something new there. And that's why sometimes old ideas are idiotic. Idiotic ideas, they pollute different ones. To give such an example, such a characteristic one. Some people think that money is bad. God be with him, with money this is not the worst thing. What is the last thing here? Something was so perfect. Here I am now. Something to do with the hair. Here is from a series of the fact that you will often wash your hair. You will wash off your prana, or something like that.
And here's an interesting thing. I was recently told that you can't go to the shower after yoga for 40 minutes. That you take pictures of yourself as.
From the same series, yes. That yogs don't wash. Why? They are this. Information is protected. Saving up, yes. To the point that it is impossible to approach them to stink. Here. You understand, right? That's a lot of such nonsense. Plenty of it. Starting from where? Somewhere in the book I didn't read it critically. Or, oh, I don't have to do anything there today. Why? But in the Tibetan horoscope it says so. And a person really builds his life according to what? And then he finds out that this horoscope was not for that year. You know, this is doubly insulting, right? Yes, that means. And there are a lot of things like that. Here. Therefore, first of all, it is the purity of the mind, it is the ability to concentrate on one thing. There are people who can't. They start talking about one thing with them, and they have a jump. Here I used to start lecturing, take me away from something. Led away, right. Jump. Yes. He began in health, remember how he finished for the repose. And it is clear that this is, the inability to concentrate. That is such a sloppy one. Sometimes this impression is confusing. Or the installations are very different there. Is it correct to say that it is the mind that concentrates? What? Is it correct to say that the mind concentrates? And with the help of reason, it just happens. Concentration comes from what our higher self is in the illusion. Well, look, let's do this, yes. Yes, there is such a thing as the axiomatics of yoga. A good thing. And there is partly a continuation of this topic, which your humble servant once revealed in a yoga visualization course. And there is a more detailed diagram of the process that occurs in thinking, for example. It consists in the fact that the flow of prana from your higher self passes through such a mind, which is called chitta. And this flow basically works as consciousness. It perceives. Here we will then read in these passages, in these texts. It is simply an observer, a witness, a perceiver. On the other hand, it perceives a certain area related to the mind, which is called buddhi. It is a kind of substance where thought forms are formed. And so it turns out that our higher self, it concentrates on a thought or thought form on the surface of our buddhi. Buddhi is like, ripples on the water. And where do thought forms come from? They get caught. What pushes us to generate a thought form in a booth? Of course, first of all, these are the objects and phenomena of our world that we encounter. Our sense organs, they give information. This information somehow passes into our mind and forms an accurate picture of what they perceived. And this is the picture we are exploring. That is, in a sense, we do not see the world, we see it from the picture that our mind draws. And there are two things. First of all, this picture may be, well, as if it has nothing to do with what it really is. Somewhere the signal distortion has passed. And on the other hand, we have such a leapfrog of these pictures that we don't know which one to look at. And as a result, everything gets mixed up in such a mess. This is the problem of modern websites. By the way, partly ours. You open 1,025,000 of these, as it were, messages, banners. Everything is flashing there, everything is calling, buy, come in. Here. Especially these commercial obsessive ones, yes there. That's all the time, right. As a result, your consciousness dissipates in an even layer, and you do not understand anything, close the site, and take it away. A good website is made like this. Here's a lot of empty space, as well as good advertising. And a few pieces on the fingers of the main topics so that your consciousness is not sprayed. This is the budget of such an average country. Do you understand? You can do nothing at all but create with this energy. Unfortunately, who does it here? With us. Well, not professionals are engaged in design. There should be a lot of conservatism here, you know. I've already taught someone something once, without forcing them to retrain. Because it will end badly for your wallet. Here. And where did we start? I have everything, I have already carried me. Yes, so I am sending everyone interested to the site of the opanyogaclass.com to the appropriate course, which is called Visualization Yoga. There's a more detailed explanation of how our mind is made. We are going to touch on it a little more now, but there is more detailed. So, any more questions? Yes, please.
When a person starts doing yoga, he actually pumps himself up with prana, right, and it develops accordingly. All abilities develop with all the success of both the body and the mind, and so on. That a person ends. But at some moments, when it would seem the most unprepared person does not realize himself. Let's say, at the moment of falling asleep, the mind begins, well, roughly speaking, to bully. That is, here's a bunch of thoughts. A swarm of thoughts prevents you from falling asleep. And if you don't put it in order, roughly speaking, you don't start saying that there is no. Here we have a program, we are sleeping now, and so on. That is, you are doing some kind of concentration, or something else. Then, under the influence of the fact that there is a lot of prana in you, this cosmogony begins, which interferes with merit.
No, well, that's not exactly a lot of prana. It just might be others. Just maybe from a small amount of prana, which the mind sucks out of its last strength. You know, mind control is really compared to controlling a monkey. Try to obey the monkey. That is, the mind behaves either like a small child. You start taking away his toy, such a howl will raise. Now do an experiment, try it normally. You will now get a concert before the end of the seminar, but I assure you, it will take exactly 3 minutes. Before the toy that now made up the meaning of life will be thrown away, and the next toy will come in its place. This is how we switch attention, and it becomes important to us. And in fact, the training of our mind is to control this switching process. And who can't? Why? Because when there is a novelty, it is easy for the mind to grasp it. But the true refinement of the mind is not to grasp the new, but to hold on to the old. Our mind is made like this: one new interesting, oh, through. Second, oh, I quit. Third, he threw it. As a result, we know about everything and nothing. And the true control of the mind is when we, here is one, it is one. Our thoughts are drawn to the side. Think about that, about Sima, the fifth, the 10th. But we don't. We think about what we need to think about. The mind resists it. We must ignore him, develop our will. Then, really, thoughts have another such dangerous thing. They begin to connect emotions. Abstractly, friends, it's very easy to fight with thoughts. But it's almost impossible to fight thoughts that are pumped up with emotions. You can, here's a typical example of such a frequent, well, in different variations. Are you going to work? Well, yes, I'm going to work. All right, that's it today. What did I do this morning? Well, yes, I ate there, stroked something there. Iron. Do you understand? That's it. And that's what it is right away. Maybe they turned it off, but only you didn't have time to remember it, and the thought came that you hadn't turned it off. And the emotion was pumped up, and the emotion begins to overshadow your memory. And so, and you are already in doubt, but did you turn it off, or did you not turn it off? If you thought without emotion, how would you go through the chain? Yes, well, how did I not turn it off, if I cleaned the table there on which it was standing? I mean, did he fall or something? Yes. Well, there, for example, yes. And if there is some emotion that your house is already burning there, then everything is completely confused in your head there. And here are parasitic thoughts, they use it. That is, as soon as the thought is connected to the emotion, and the emotion connects through you the former negative experience, you become an easy prey in the hands of any thought, and the mind controls and plays with you like a cat with a mouse. So there are some of them here. How can I tell you? Exercises on working with the Ajna chakra, on working with the mind. If you want to control the mind, disconnect it from emotions. As long as he enters into your emotional structures. Oh, this is a nightmare. That the mind includes emotions. Emotions splash adrenaline into the blood, and this is objective chemistry. You are already objectively shaking. And this vicious circle needs to be broken. It was a good scheme when we lived in the bodies of animals, because there was no time to think about whether a tiger or not a tiger. It was necessary to get away as quickly as possible. And for this, as much adrenaline as possible was needed. And this mechanism, it has shown itself perfectly in life, in the bodies of animals. But in the human body, he plays a bad service with us. That's why they say that if you follow the path of emotions, these emotions will lead you to hell there. Whatever it is, fear or seduction, whatever. It is for this reason that it turns out that, in fact, working with the mind is, of course, certainly concentration. It is certainly keeping thoughts on one thing, but it is very difficult to keep thoughts on one thing. As long as your feelings pump up your thoughts. You know, I have sometimes asked why half the world is interested in football. My dad was such a fan of Spartak, fanatical, he turned on the TV there with a gasp, so it means not to miss it. I asked myself, well, it would be nice if you played football yourself. So no, you're sitting on the sofa, so you're a borscht, so you're eating, and watching how 20 people, 24 heads are chasing one ball back and forth. Or how many of them there are, it doesn't matter. 22 millionaires are chasing one ball. Yes. That's a good joke, yes. Soj. Question. Why is football interesting? Why are people interested in football if they don't even play it? The answer is as follows. In its original form, it has nothing to do with their real life. Because if you start thinking about something that has to do with your real life, fear or something else will be added to the thought, to the excitement. And here is something completely abstract, which is interesting, logical, exciting. But on what can you switch from your normal life, full of stress and emotions, to a parallel plane, where, in fact, nothing depends on you, but there is something, some kind of action even. And emotions are moderately controlled. Here. And it brings rest. Because in normal life, these emotions would devour you. And there are emotions, well, yes, they are sometimes pleasant, sometimes less pleasant when the team lost. But not so as to die. Here. Or there's stamp collecting, or something. Here's some kind of thing that is not related to your world, in some ideal world, living according to its own rules, in which the mind is absorbed, it is interesting to him, but the degree of emotional involvement there is minimal. That's when it's interesting. If, well, as a rule, look, I remember when I was little. Let's say I was little, I was interested in watching films about the war. Well, boy, of course, I'm playing. Why? Because it doesn't mean anything to me. And try somehow to plant a normal veteran to watch. Yes, how to remember that some kind of nightmare was happening. And here again, they show some gangster TV series there. Friends, I assure you, if you really get in touch with bad bandits once, you will just be sick of this topic alone. That it even exists on planet Earth. All these investigators, all these cops out there, all these showdowns. If you plunge into this abomination at least once in your life, with your good karma, you will say, no, this is not my universe, this is a parallel universe, and I am to it. I don't even want to know at all. Do you understand? Yes.
Computer games, for example.
Computer games, absolutely right. So, all right, we're off to the side again. Wonderful. Once again, we read the texts, analyze them. Come on, Mish, come on with Yandra. Yes, well done, you reminded me. Let's point the camera at the pit. And we have it all visible to everyone. It is visible to everyone. Except, sit down here, explain. While I'm having tea drops. Oh well. We have such a wonderful yantra, which just reflects what is described in Runi's Sharkana. It is said that two petals, here they are on the edge, that there is a bija mantra, here it is in the middle of such a sign. More precisely, not even but a M here. I'll tell you about it later. There is our goddess actually, with 6 heads, with her attributes. There is also a lingam, that is, there is where this god is placed in our Parma Shiva. Well, you take the text directly, read it from the text and show it. This is also not particularly convenient, to be honest. According to the text, the one whose mind is steadily fixed on this lotus, that the breath is controlled by fluff, has the power to pass through the 3 worlds. Neither Brahma, nor Vishnu, nor Hari, Hera, Shiva, nor Suda, nor Ganapati are unable to resist the beautiful white density similar to the moon called Ajna. Well, here it is, of course, painted with petals not that white, but we fixed it. In theory, it should be white. Immediately we painted it white. He shines with the glory of drunkenness, the Hakini minds are inside him. Here are our 6-headed Hakini minds. His 6 faces are like many moons. That is, such beautiful moon faces. She has 6 arms, we have 4, but in fact, I'm going to tell you about the other 2. In one of them, in which she holds a book, the other 2 are raised up, a position of averting fear, giving good. With the rest of her hands, she holds a skull, a small drum, and a bouquet of roses. But also a bouquet of roses, here the flower is just a vacation. Her creation is pure. In other words, we see, yes, that its creation is pure, that is, it does not exist at all in principle. That is, there were two chakras in all of them, god and goddess, god and goddess. Lathati still had a lingam in two chakras, and Anahate has a lingam, that is, these are the same grankas. The so-called ones that have already been discussed, which means, but certain places where Maya is particularly strong, or where we will need to pass them, that is, make some efforts, especially important ones. That is, for example, in Muladhara, that it is necessary to realize this center at all, first of all. Secondly, it is the center that, in general, it is necessary to awaken this energy. That is, in general, it is necessary, roughly speaking, to think even differently, that there is energy there that needs to be awakened, that needs to be raised, that needs to be somehow done with it, worked with, yes. In other words, this is the first step. The second step is when we rise to the level of Anahata. In other words, this snake is depicted there in the form of a girl, that is, already a goddess. That is, she has the appearance of a beautiful goddess. That is, it is no longer a snake that crawled up, but which is already a beautiful girl. Here, well, these feelings appear, this sense of unity and so on. Yes, and usually people start to slow down on it too. They become so blissful, and already think that they have realized everything. We are all good, we will feed everyone. And we will walk around smiling happily. But it wasn't there. There is also the following. That is, even if we pass it and understand that we need to sharpen our mind. We are climbing higher, and we are already honing this mind, that is, this is the next graph. And that it is, even if we sharpened it, it is on two ends, a stick on two ends. We begin to hone, and immediately we begin to dive, as Vadim told us, into some kind of world. Then we begin to drive ourselves into some kind of cage. And we have already given up, and it is not a joy for us to start life. There is no meaning in life, because Ajna, again, the mind cannot answer what is the meaning of life, and a person begins to get lost in it all. And yoga calls, of course, to go further. Here. And, actually, here is our goddess, who was in the hut of the ugly girl presented, rose up, and became such a Parmashiva. Androgenically, she will be here. That is, on the one hand, it is a girl, and on the other hand, it is a man. That is, we know that the light of consciousness, it shines here as clearly as possible, as strongly as possible. That is, there is practically no energy as such here, and it is already merging together. And here the duality of being is born. That is, here the division into good and bad, into right and wrong, male and female begins. And, in fact, this is what she personifies. This goddess looks like this. And the fact that the one who overcomes, even on the chaga, he connects, and there is no duality above. There is one cognition, roughly speaking, of oneself or the higher self. Or we will continue to pass. There actually are also their own steps. But it's a little different there. In other words, in order to pass the steps further, we will need to turn on the mind and go further with pure knowledge without thinking. Both of these gods of ours have snakes hanging from them, goddesses and God. What do these snakes represent? It's like our thought forms. They envelop us all the time, and our task is to learn to control them so that they become our friends, and not those who drive us down our path, yes, like our wolves. Paramashiva's right side holds a trident, which means that he completely puts the tribunes under control, that is, the guna of sattva, the guna of rajas, the guna of tamas, that is, such a guna of inertia, stupidity, the guna of rajas. That is, it is such activity, and the third, when the guna of clarity, and we understand everything. But even further, we are even higher still rises above them, and holds them in his hand. Well, what can I tell you? And the second hand, in theory, In theory, it should eliminate obstacles. In different treatises, again, it was different. Either he keeps a drum there, or he removes obstacles. Here it just hangs for some reason. The next one is the goddess. That is, this is what? Well, what kind of energy, that is, how we will behave, roughly speaking, when we rise to this level. And what actions do we need to perform in order to rise higher, to possess qualities? She holds a drum in one hand. The Shiva drum is such a small drum in which a rhythm is created. Yes, it's called. A rhythm is created in which Rita lives, in which any higher being should live, feeling the rhythm in this life. In another hand, she holds a skull, again a symbol of renunciation, as in the lower one, in almost all of them she held. But a mudra that bestows a blessing, that is, removes an obstacle. It also talks about 6 hands, and here you can too. Often she is depicted in a mudra that removes obstacles, grants fearlessness, and in one she holds either a book or a clear one. A symbol of concentration, a symbol of gaining knowledge. In short, that's probably all. That is, if the next time we see an image like this, then we should understand that what the chakra has, the Ajna chakra. We should immediately understand what's what.
Misha, question, do you say anything about 6 heads? Why 6 heads?
6 heads are actually, they increase each time the chakra increases. In other words, it turns out, roughly speaking, another energy begins to work. That is, the head is, for example, a muladhara, that is, it is the most primordial impulse of energy, which is not yet dual, which is primordial, and so on. Then above, we move on to Svadhisthana, and we have another such world, the inner world. Here are the children, when they grow up, they have some kind of inner world. That is, they rise higher, it turns out that they have an external one, but there is some kind of internal one. And so on. They begin to rise, and different layers of energy are formed, well, roughly speaking. Package. Yes. And what does the flower mean? Flower, yes, a good question. I missed it. The flower means unaffected, actually. Any more questions? Yeah. Wonderful. Great. So, you know, these 6 heads were associated with 5 feelings when they talked about that. 6th. Yes, maybe. Yes, friends, you have to understand, you know, here's the difficulty. But all the attributes are non-verbal. Let's say that the trident is wider. There's Shiva with a trident, see, standing, right. They have so many justifications, I can't tell you. Every yoga school has something different. Someone says, trident, it means there are 3 worlds. Someone says it's Sushumnaya Ida and Pingala, someone else. And so literally for each of these. And do you know what a very interesting thing is? When you start practicing yoga, purely practical, these symbols always loom before your eyes. And so you did some kind of asana, and something came to you, and you mentally, as it were, oh, so this is how this, that is drawn there. And then you think to yourself, is it really so or did it seem to you? Yes, here. And therefore, in fact, here are such explanations. What does it mean? You can meet a lot. Mass. It is impossible to say that they are all right or all wrong there. They are, well, like this method to teach you to think abstractly. Abstractly. Okay, all right. So what do we have? You can read the texts again here. Texts. It is in such details. Yes, let's start with the details now. In general. Well, let's go back to the Chakranir. By suggestion and comment. The yujin, whose mind is firmly fixed on this lotus, whose breath is controlled by Kuaka, has the power to pass through the 3 worlds. Here, let's take it apart. Let's take it apart. So, there is one who can concentrate his consciousness on the Ajna chakra, and then a bundle with breathing.
на Аджна-чакре и дальше связка с дыханием.
Kumbhaka breath.
Дыхание кумбхака.
What is Kumbhaka?
Кумбхака.
Well, in an allegorical sense, it's a delay.
Это задержка.
And in a purely practical sense, sometimes it's when you make a delay in inhaling, and you have a pitcher-shaped stomach.
В форме кувшина.
One of the meanings of the word kumha is like a jug. And then look at what a very interesting technique, practice is born on this.
Рождается на этом.
If you master pranayama at the expense of kumbhaka on inspiration, and the direction of consciousness to the center of the third eye of the Ajna chakra, you can approach such a very interesting phenomenon.
Подойти к такому очень интересному явлению.
You have, as it were, such a wave, first of all, the expansion of blood vessels. And that in itself, you know, just starts to swim before my eyes.
Плыть перед глазами.
Try to stand up abruptly,
Встать.
but this is not enough. There is also an effect when a small amount of the finest prana enters the central channel through Ajna.
Мельчайшие праны входят в центральный канал через Аджну.
And you didn't just have everything floating, but you flew out.
А вы вылетели.
It's a completely phantasmagoric feeling.
Ощущение.
I mean me. Somehow.
Я как
I had one friend.
у меня был.
There was only one student, but he has such a complicated background. He dabbled in drugs at one time,
Наркотой баловался.
and somehow he managed to do this exercise. He said the drugs were resting.
Когда отдыхает.
That is, the degree of euphoria of the experience is even somewhere higher, but in terms of negative consequences, like heaven and earth.
Негативным последствиям, ну,
You understand, right? The exact opposite. In other words, there are, you know, such sets of euphoric practices. Sometimes they are abused, sometimes in all kinds of breathing practices.
иногда во всякого рода дыхательных практиках
I've come across some.
сталкивался с некоторыми. Там очень
Hyperventilation of the lungs is going on. They breathe, 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 then pop, and that's it. And disconnected. You know, such a rough version of forced reality.
принудительные пранаямы.
This, of course, is abused because it is not very good. It strains all structures. And it's not a fact that, again, the same effect can be achieved. If in reality, with the help of meditation and pranayama, prana is forced to enter the central channel, then you have the power of self-awareness of yourself to overcome all obstacles that you can only meet in this world or in all three worlds.
Преодолению всех препятствий, которые вы только можете в этом мире встретить, или во всех трех мирах, как там сказано. Дальше.
Neither Brahma, Vishnu, nor Hari, Hera, Shiva, nor Suraka are able to resist him.
Противостоять ему.
And then look, there is an opposition of the power of the gods.
Представление могущества богов.
Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu. You remember, the Hindus are, in general, very touching people with regard to religion.
В отношении религии.
They have all religions everywhere and, accordingly, the life of a mortal is entirely determined by the action of the gods, who can reward or curse there. Well, in this regard, it is said that if you have risen to the level of reason, then you have risen above the level of all the concepts that can only be defining your life.
Определяющих твою жизнь.
And, accordingly, no one can influence you anymore.
Может на тебя повлиять.
Next,
Дальше.
a beautiful white lotus in a similar moon is called as much. Here it is described as a beautiful white lotus.
Как прекрасный белый лотос.
In general, in fact, there are sometimes differences in the description, and sometimes disputes arise, the origin of the word Ajna, because it is consonant with two things.
Знаете, двум таким вещам.
Is like denying the bottom on knowledge.
Знание.
Knowledge with such a capital letter, knowledge of the wow.
Знание, ого-го.
That is, as if starting from this level, it's like we have differentiated knowledge, really, when we divide everything into I not me. Here I am, and there I am not. After all, if you figure it out, imagine, yes, where you end, the surrounding universe begins. How can you tell? At first glance, it's very simple. Here they touched me, aha. That's it. That wasn't me there. That's when they touched me, I'm already there. And imagine, they gave you an analgesic injection. They touch you, but you don't care if I'm not me. And this is how you can pass through all the senses. Touch, smell, vision, so this is echolocation due to hearing. Yes. But all the same, sooner or later, friends, such a single boundary of yourself or not self will be revealed. It's the mind. Visualization yoga is built on this. As a matter of fact, the way you look is, in general, a random hallucination, if you call things by their proper names. That's how it happened by chance. Your mind perceives itself this way and that, and shapes itself this way and that. But no one prevents you from forming yourself in another body at this level. And this is what yoga visualization is built on. Quite interesting exercises. We need to learn to visualize ourselves in different bodies. And a person must learn to visualize himself in the body of, say, an animal or in the body of some object and identify himself. So, what is it? Stomach. So, it means this. And you see, it turns out that, in fact, such a fundamental misconception, such, clearly expressed for an already embodied person, begins with the level of reason. Of course, the deepest delusion, begins at the level when your higher self begins to consider itself its own prana, just as a person begins to consider himself his own shadow. My hand. Here. And somehow here is the most vivid, this process of separation into I and not I, where I end, where the surrounding universe begins. Good or evil or whatever. In fact, this is the level of the principle of reason. That's sometimes how the origin of the word Ajna is explained. Although I'm not sure there aren't others. Mine for what? You don't want to. Well, also, as an option, there is the same explanation, only the opposite way up. If we rise higher, then we overcome this everyday knowledge, being, and we have Ajna, the highest knowledge, which there is no knowledge. Understanding. Well. We protect, we take care, otherwise we now have assistance without yoga. On its two petals are the letters X and X, which are also white, which increases the beauty of this lotus. Here. Look here. Remember, all the previous chakras had petals with different numbers of petals and different letters. And here at Woodruff, remember, we read that 50 letters of the Sanskrit alphabet end with these letters. In other words, these are some kind of vibrations that are somehow consonant with these two letters, from which it is possible to compose. From all the remaining ones as well, all words, objects, phenomena of the universe. This is also a topic for reflection. And you remember that in each chakra before that there was a so-called bija mantra, or the mantra responsible for. How can I tell you, for the origin of the principle? And here too, there are quite complex interpretations. What kind of bija mantra corresponds to the Ajna chakra? It says here that Biyaro is sometimes called Bijarim. Sometimes God knows what else is called. Why? Because it's a difficult question. It seems like bija was supposed to represent the unfolding of the entire universe. If any bija correlated like that, it was probably with the Sahasrara chakra. But on the other hand, again, the whole manifested world, it is just most characteristically manifested through the first principle of reason. In other words, this is a difficult question. I am not ready to comment on it. You remember, yes, that some sources sometimes do not coincide with each other, which have come down to us from antiquity, actually. There's nothing you can do about it. He shines with the glory of Dhyana. Inside him, in the Hakini mine, all 6 faces are like many moons. He shines Dhyana Slav with glory. In other words, there are such stages, again, of meditation or unidirectional reflection, which together are 3 called sanyama. But in fact, this is the degree of concentration. One of the most serious degrees of concentration is called dhyana, after which there is a state of samadhi, the highest state. That is, if you have put the Ajna chakra under control, the next step for you is samadhi, the highest state in yoga. She has 6 hands, in one of which she holds a book, the other 2 raised up in the position of averting fear and giving good. The rest of her hands she holds a skull, a small drum, and a bouquet of roses. Her mind is clear. Here again, each of these symbols is a skull, a gesture that repels fear. Again, it allegorically symbolizes, as I tell you, those characteristic qualities that come into your life. But remember, yes, here is the Latin expression, remember death. What does it sound like?
The sea.
A moment by the sea, right. A moment by the sea, right. Yes. So. And they told me one joke, can I take a break? One comrade confused the expression of the moment of the sea with the expression of the mind of the moment. And I was on the train. One elderly lady asked him to give up his seat, and instead of saying at the moment, he said the sea to the moment. Like a grandmother thinking about death, right? Here, Latin is insidious. So, you understand that it is possible. Do you remember what started with the Buddha? With the Buddha, how did it all begin? He lived happily for himself. He knew no refusal in anything. And suddenly I was faced with some moments, one of which was death. And suddenly he realized that compared to the idea of death, his current pleasure is rather a torture. To the expectations of future suffering. Well, in terms of, yes, have fun, eat, drink. And tomorrow will do it for you, right? Here you can have fun with today's life, knowing you know what. You are in danger of death. It is clear that there will be no time for fun anymore, or as this beloved Mark Twain said, nothing clears the mind like the prospect of being hanged in the morning. In the same way, nothing makes the mind think about the objects of existence more than the concept of death. Therefore, humanity, it conducts such a policy. Either it tries not to think about the moments of death, but if it really starts to think, then this is where serious philosophy begins. And therefore, let's assume the same as the symbol, that she holds a skull, but does not reason anything so much, but as about the frailty and finiteness of life, like a skull. You take the skull. I remember being shocked in general as a child. You look, Lord, the man was alive. So are you. And scary. You also walked, ate something, talked to someone, and now you're holding this knuckle, right? Scary. And that's exactly the same as all the other attributes. In other words, they have a multi-level plan. In general, in fact, it is consonant, you know, with what theme of European alchemy. Here I am as a child. I was still interested in chemistry as a child. I was very interested in chemistry. And always wanted to make some kind of bomb since childhood. And I started reading all the books. And I need to make some gunpowder. And how? Fuck knows how to make it. Well, how did the Middle Ages do there? I started reading what the monks were grinding there, what they were grinding there, mixing. And it is clear, I have read these treatises in. And along the way I came across, well, in the history of chemistry, of course. Because it's like this, that these were primitive technologies, let's say. Some even amazed me, let's say, how saltpeter was made for gunpowder. Monks were forced to go to the toilet in the same place, and then after 2 or 3 years, this earth was dissolved in water, evaporated. Which means that salidra was obtained. There was even a tax. Toilet tax. Come across any treatises, including those on Hermeticism, I remember everything there. Hermes Trismegistus, twice the great, thrice the greatest. Then this whole symbolism, you know, is alchemical. There's all this king taking a bath there or something. Some, by the way, were openly erotic in nature. Here, alchemical, right. There's a wedding between there's something, right. Here. And I understand that there was some such parallel. And apparently, one Yuko alchemy still came from there with India, with its own kind of symbolism. If you understand it, any drawing is alchemical. For you, in fact, the book is already open. Yes, that's how it should be treated. You know how. Meaningful. Because you can emphasize a lot of information about that greedy chakra just by meditating on this picture. Another conversation, where did this picture come from? Who painted it? According to my information, it was painted by order of John George Woodrow. That is, and Woodrow, in fact, did it all at the beginning of the 20th century. Then it went into circulation, and we still see this picture on every corner. But it's hard to find more ancient ones, and they are drawn a little differently, by the way. Well, who is interested in this? Something was launched into circulation, so it went for a walk. So, read on. In this lotus is the abode of the subtle discerning mind of Manas, who is well known. And look, this bundle of thinking process is definitely connected with the Ajna chakra, so if someone boasts of opening the third, ask him to solve the differential equation. If he doesn't decide, it's better to keep silent about the third eye. Well, or something else, some kind of intellectual task. Because, you know, to say that the center of intelligence is revealed, and you, I'm sorry, are as stupid as a log. It somehow doesn't really connect one with the other. Next. Inside it is a yoni, at the base of the lotus, Shiva, in the form of a lingam, called Antara lingam. Here, further on, here is such symbolism, again quite erotic, if you know the true meaning of the words yoni and lingam. The yoni is a female reproductive organ, and the lingam, respectively, is male. And together, how can you understand, yes. When one is in the other, it is, to put it mildly, a sexual union. But here everything is allegorical. Here is the union of consciousness of energy, which, strictly speaking, at a very subtle level, forms the principle of reason. So do you remember when we talked about thinking before? What is a thought, right? What is the thinking process? You have the subtlest consciousness, that is, a very strong one. And you have a very subtle energy. And instant adjustment of one to the other. In other words, consciousness forces energy to manifest in the form that consciousness wants. Energy forces consciousness to highlight what it is to him. So, the mutual influence of one on the other. As a result, there is the ability to generate thought forms, the consciousness of energy. In other words, the carrier is mind energy. Well, the energy of the mind is a more serious concept than energy. But it's colored somehow. It is colored by what consciousness wants to see. And this is where completely unique yoga practices are born, which go beyond the scope of this seminar. All those interested are once again referred to visualization yoga.
Еще раз интересуешься, отсылаю к йоге визуализации.
It is available.
Доступно. Дальше.
Here it shines like a chain of lightning flashes. Yeah. The first bija mantra Om is about the highest mind, which with its light illuminates and gives visible Brahma Sutra, which is located there. Well, let's go further.
Мы сейчас не будем на это самое.
That is, roughly speaking, the comprehension of the world. Here is the comprehension of the world, because it starts counting.
Мышление мира. Оно ведь счет начинает.
Well, you can't think before you have it.
Раньше, чем у вас есть это
What is it called?
называется-то.
Scheming, right?
Мышлилка. Да?
That is, it is clear that any clear idea of the structure of our universe, it can arise no earlier than there is a principle of reason.
Представление о устройстве нашей Вселенной оно может возникнуть не раньше, чем есть принцип разума.
Therefore, strictly speaking, when we talk about something or comprehend something with the help of reason, it is unambiguous, as if we are trying to project at the level of reason, including that which was higher than reason.
И то, что было выше, чем разум.
Although it turns out, of course, very bad.
Очень плохо.
That is why yoga is not comprehended by formal dry knowledge, logic.
Логикой йога не постигается.
It's a general situation that you can read all the books, all the concepts, you can learn to be clever in Sanskrit. You can pretend to be a great guru there.
Себя там великого гуру.
But it's like book knowledge.
Это как бы книжное знание.
It somehow corresponds to true knowledge.
Истинному знанию.
But this is a pitiful shadow of higher knowledge.
Высшего знания.
But again, even if this is a pathetic shadow, we somehow designate it. How do we denote? Yes, we speak absolutely, or all that came from the Om mantra.
Мантры Ом.
And as if even the Om mantra itself in terms of its awareness, purely logically, when we experience it, it comes at the level of the mind.
Вот приходит на уровне разума.
Next. Yes, here it is called Brahma Sutra, that is, the highest knowledge. Higher knowledge, yes. That is, Brahma, the creator of the entire universe created. And in the morning, do you know how to remember a word in the morning? Here is such a Russian word essence.
The essence,
The essence, you know.
the essence.
And so, in fact, it's like the essence that Brahma has just outlined to you.
Суть, которую, значит, Брахма вам сейчас
And just like yoga in the morning Patanjali, right? This is the essence that Patanjali outlined to yogi.
изложила йога.
That's how it can be translated.
Перевести. Дальше.
Sugar, whose mind is steady, let them meditate on it according to the prescriptions. Well, that's all we are now. What we have been talking about, on this excellent Sadhakacha Atma, is nothing but meditation on this lotus, capable of quickly reaching another body at will and becoming the most outstanding among saints and sages, omniscient and all-seeing.
выдающимся среди святых и мудрецов, всезнающим и всевидящим.
And then he becomes a benefactor of everything and a connoisseur of all the teachings.
Знатоком всех учений.
Realizing his oneness with Brahman, he acquires supernatural and unknown powers.
И неведомые силы.
Full glory, he is long-lived.
Долгоживущий
He becomes the creator, guardian, and destroyer of the three worlds. Wonderful. Then what else do we have there? Well, that is, there is more to comment on. Friends, you own the Ajna Chakra. The whole world is in your pocket, as they say. Super. That is, to dream. Next, the wisest. In this chakra, a combination of two Om constantly resides inside the triangle, forming the Om mantra.
мантру Ом.
This is the inner atmospirit, whose essence is pure mind.
Чистый разум.
It resembles a flame.
Знает пламя.
Above, it is half of the moon, and above, it is the letter Ma before the manifestation of Makar, the shape of a dot.
Точки.
Even higher, it is necessary, whose whiteness is the same as the whiteness of Dave's ball or the moon. Here is such an indirect, allegorical mention of other very important points, as if the structure of our body is a bunch of necessary bindu.
Устройство нашего тела – это связка нада-бинду.
need a
Да,
bindu.
да, надо бинду.
In other
То
words,
есть,
let's do it so that you have at least some idea of what a bindu is.
представление. Что такое бинду?
In general, in fact,
Вообще, на
it
самом
is
деле, можно
possible in some
в
texts,
некоторых
in
текстах
my
вот я
opinion,
уже буду
the same
руководствоваться
Gudrav
не
does not
бинду, а
write bindu,
винду.
but windu. Like windows, you know, a window. Or in another way, here you have your
Вот
higher
у вас
self
где-то ваше
somewhere.
высшее я.
Where
Где
is
оно?
it? And God knows where it
Бог
is.
знает, где
It is
оно. Оно вне
beyond space and
пространства и
time.
времени.
But a thread
Но от
of
вашего
prana
высшего
stretches from
я
your higher self to your
к
bodies
вашим
and
телам и
structures.
структурам тянется нить праны.
Prana manifests
Прана
itself as
проявляет
consciousness
себя
and
как
energy.
сознание и энергия.
But there is this
Ну и
point
где-то
somewhere
есть эта
when prana
точка,
falls from nowhere, where your
когда
higher self is
из
located
места
instead of where.
ниоткуда, где находится ваше высшее я, попадает прана. Вместо куда?
That is,
То есть
and it is
понятно,
clear
что
that
есть
there is some
некая
kind
такая
of
как
gate
бы
through
ворота,
which the stream of consciousness from
через
your higher
которое
self enters.
заходит
In other words, the principle of
поток
reason is the
сознания
principle of reason.
от вашего высшего я. То есть принцип разума — это принцип разума.
It's like
Это
the
как
ocean,
океан, он
it's
большой,
big and
бесконечный.
boundless. Your little mind
Ваш
principle
небольшой
is like a
принцип
small
разума — это как
separated part
небольшая
from a big
отделенная
ocean.
часть от большого океана.
I like it.
Мне
I read a
нравится одно
comparison in one
прочитал
book.
сравнение.
Imagine that you
Представьте,
took
что
a
вы взяли
portrait,
портрет,
broke the image, and there
вырвали
was only
изображение,
one frame
осталась
left.
одна рамка.
And this frame
Эту
was
рамку
thrown
вы
to the
кинули
surface of
на
the ocean.
поверхность океана.
And what is inside
То,
the
что
frame
внутри
is your
рамки, это
personal
ваш
mind,
личный
and the
разум.
whole ocean is the
А весь
universal
океан —
mind.
это всеобщий
But there is
разум.
no border.
Границы
There
нет.
is a
Есть
conditional
условная
frame
рамка,
that
которая
floats on the
плавает
surface
на
of the common
поверхности
ocean.
общего океана.
Here,
Вот.
therefore, for the
Поэтому
first time, a stream of
в этом
consciousness
же
from your
океане
higher
где-то
self,
ныряет
which is outside the
впервые
ocean,
поток
dives
сознания от
into the
вашего
same
высшего
ocean
я, который
somewhere.
вне океана.
And where is
Вот
there
что
to
где он
dive?
ныряет.
What is this?
Что это за такое?
And here we meet
Тут
with a
вы
very
встречаетесь с
mysterious
такой
concept.
концепцией таинственнейшей.
Bindu,
Бинду.
windu.
Винду.
This is a mathematical concept, if it is said like this, to think in modern language about an infinitesimal point.
Современным языком о бесконечно малой точке.
Only in higher mathematics you will
Только
meet
в
with the
высшей
same
математике вы
concept.
встретитесь с таким же
At one
понятием,
time,
время,
Newton
фон,
and Leibniz introduced differential integral calculus,
там они
and there they operated with the
оперировали с
concept
понятием
of the
бесконечно малого,
infinitesimal,
в частности,
in particular the
бесконечно малой точки.
infinitesimal point. And so, as it turns out, our consciousness has an entrance into our body through the mind principle, through an infinitesimal point called bindu.
Сознание имеет через бесконечно малую точку, которая называется бинду.
That is, it is a small hole through which your higher self shines. And then the next bunch is very strange and difficult to understand.
А дальше следующая связка, очень странная и сложная для понимания.
But in fact,
Но ведь, по сути
what is the
дела,
light
что
of your
такое
consciousness?
цвет вашего сознания?
Consciousness is reduced to the concept of prana, and prana is reduced to the concept, in one of the variants, the concept of need. That is, well, if you like, the first outburst, which comes from this level, then.
Который исходит, значит, вот с этого уровня.
And then miracles begin in general, friends. The fact is that it is impossible to explain, for example, the birth of children, without knowing the concept of bindu.
Невозможно, не зная концепции бинду.
Because, let's say, a male seed cannot be formed if the known processes associated with bindu do not occur.
Если известные процессы, связанные с бинду, не творятся.
Very mysterious teachings. My head would have been blown off even for a direct, indirect mention of this some time ago.
Еще какое-то время.
The fact is that, as it were, in order for a male seed to arise, and the bindu point should, as it were, separate, acquire the finest energy,
Обрасти тончайшей энергией,
and, having gone through everything, our entire body, to form a man's physical seed in the human body.
физическое семя мужчины.
And then purely practical moments begin in yoga.
Моменты из йоги.
If Ajna retains his male seed, he retains both the potential of bindu and the power and the trace of his powerful consciousness.
Сознание его мощное.
If he wastes his seed in vain, and not for the birth of children, he weakens.
Рождение детей. Он слабеет.
And sometimes I am asked if a parallel topic is being born, the so-called lossless sex. Sometimes I'm stupidly asked, oh, but it's necessary to do this. This is the 5th, 10th. No, friends, in order to explain what sex without loss is, you need to know nothing more or less how our whole world works. Here. But this is by the way to say, why? Because like this manipulation of the Bindu point, they are extremely complex, but if, say, you learn to do it, then you dramatically accelerate your spiritual evolution from a level above reason.
Если, скажем, научиться это делать, то вы резко ускоряете свою духовную эволюцию. С уровня выше разума.
That is, not through cleverness, although this is also necessary, but higher than through the level of cleverness.
Уровень умничания.
And in fact, there is already such a purely practical explanation going on, which gives us a completely unique bundle, again, of the connection of breathing, sexual energy, and thinking.
Дыхание, сексуальной энергии и мышления.
If you control sexuality, and, accordingly, Windu, then the light of consciousness highlights your structures, your mind, which consist of 3 parts, manas, buddhi, and chitta, more steadily and more strongly.
Не высвечивает ваши структуры вашего разума, которые состоят из 3 частей: манас, будхи и читта.
That is, through chitta, roughly speaking, consciousness shines more powerfully.
Светит сознание.
The spotlight is bigger,
Больше.
and the power of intelligence is more powerful. Since thoughts of the form appear on the surface of the booth,
Появляются мысли формы.
and then the situation is like this. Imagine you are walking at night, you have a weak flashlight, you are shining, and you will not understand what you have there. Either a snag or a monster. Hence the phrase is born, remember, the dream of the mind generates a monster.
Сон разума порождает чудо.
As long as you have not worked out the light of consciousness, intelligence, God knows what you see, imagines, and God knows how you behave.
Вам видится, мерещится, и Бог знает, как вы себя ведете.
On the contrary, if the light of your consciousness is as powerful as a searchlight, you are no longer there, you know. Such incomprehensible, but it is already very clearly visible what is in front of you.
Ясно видно, что перед вами.
Therefore, there is a link to work with the Ajna chakra is not obvious.
Неочевидная.
One is through sexual practices, the other through breathing practices about Nayama yoga.
Практики пранаяма-йоги.
And the purely practical advice is as follows. You are facing a creative task.
Задача творческая.
How to do something in an open yoga university to benefit all of humanity.
Чтобы облагодетельствовать все человечество.
Here you are meditating 4 days and nights for the benefit of all living beings, and no thoughts come. A purely practical point, do pranayama yoga. Practice about Nayama yoga. A lot of the most, sometimes inspiring ideas will begin to visit you. That is, there is prana, it means that the work immediately goes better for you.
Работа с разумом идет лучше.
Again, you practice only chaste sex, where you choose only pleasure, and the part that goes to the continuation of life is preserved.
Продолжение жизни сохраняется.
Also enhance your intelligence.
Развивайте свой интеллект.
This is a triple bundle.
Двойная связка.
Closed was.
Закрытейшая, закрытейшая была.
What are we talking about? Just like that. We're moving on, we're still staying there.
Так, дальше идем. Мы же еще там остановились.
As for prana, it fills chakra after chakra. That is, the higher the chakra, the more difficult it is to work with it. Roughly speaking, the more prana is needed and the thinner it should be. That is, the first one is clear that it fills the Muladhara, that it is necessary to eat, sleep, and so on. Firm course to find. Rough is easier for us, and then the more subtle it is, the more we need to know some nuances already.
Знать уже какие-то нюансы.
That is, in order to work, for example, with the same Dashna chakra, why did they lock up the monks? And there should have been no sexual union. because it is so that they can really work out all these sacred texts, so that they accumulate this potential, so that there is enough for all structures. And this is also an important point, the control of the truth. Well, actually, initially, once again, friends, initially all the monks were not perverts. I mean, why not everyone, but those who? You know, because all the time. They have a monastery there, and there at night some kind of morja, you know, obscene. It would also be fine with the girls there, otherwise it's not clear at all how. Here. And the question arises, why is it that they are so pret? You find out, and it means they have a celibacy dinner. But who the pervert came up with a celibacy dinner for them? Foreheads are young, healthy, eat well, right? And a celibacy lunch. Yes, they won't climb the walls. And initially everything was very thought out in order to preserve the potential for studying higher education. Because, please note, any religion, as we have already said, you begin to comprehend it not from the level of reason. And reason will both help and harm religion. Moreover, it is not even clear what is more. And from a level beyond logic. And without this higher potential, you will not turn on logic in any way. And where to get this potential? Due to sexuality, there is no more resource. At this level of ignorance. Here. That is, everything is really, that's just what I'm getting at. They come to me from time to time, they begin to scold certain religions. Friends, don't scold them, leave them alone. They have their own strengths and weaknesses enough. Because sometimes it is. Yes, further. When a yajin closes a house that remains without support, he thus receives knowledge with the help of a higher teacher. When, through the repetition of this practice, Chio becomes repeated in this place, Chio becomes dissolved in this place in the chakra. Then he sees clearly sparkling flashes of fire in the triangle and in the space above it. And then look at what a very interesting technique. By putting the mind principle under control, then you remember, right? The next step is that having worked out the level of logic of the mind, the level of superlogic, and the highest intuition of direct comprehension comes to you by itself. And there is no doubt anymore whether it is stupidity or not. These are pure revelations from above. And there is a mention of this. And how is it there? Training from a higher teacher. Read it again. Here, the last one. Yes, yes, yes. But when Ijin closes the house, which remains without support, he thus receives knowledge with the help of a higher teacher. So, closes the house, which remains without support. Or, in other words, you pull prana out of all structures, from all chakras. And you can easily do this by pulling it out of the Ajna chakra. It is automatically pulled out of all the others. A house without a support. By house, we mean the human theme. A house without support is a person in samadhi. Therefore, there is such a very interesting property. If you have reached a certain degree of samadhi, your body lies like a corpse. The pupils do not react to sunlight, the pulse is not palpable. The state of clinical death. So, you know, when I hear something here and there from time to time, someone has samadhi there. They are trying to lead someone to samadhi in class. I ask myself, do they want some kind of crawling, lying down? Are there corpses in clinical death? It's a scary sight, isn't it? Here. That is, in fact, the highest state is when you have pulled yourself out of the body, your prana out of the body. And the body. What about the body? The body was left without support. It's a corpse. On this, various other aphorisms are born that when a person is alive for yoga, he is dead for the world. Sometimes it means quite a literal thing. When you have the highest revelations there in samadhi, your body lies lifeless. Here. So, I'm in India. In India, as it seems, this was a fairly widespread phenomenon.
широко распространенное явление.
In particular, let's read Ramakrishna from this.
Прочитаем его.
Didn't you print it out? Oh no, it's urgent to print. It is said that Ramakrishna spent half of his life in Sama. In other words, he would not have returned if he had not had to teach the remaining other people. That's the reason he was coming back. Moreover, one of the first samadhi, when he lay there for several days in this state, in his very shack there.
Там пролежал несколько дней в таком состоянии.
Yes, but we are interested in another question.
Другой вопрос.
So you pulled prana out of the mind. This prana began to be absorbed and realized as the first vibration, it is necessary.
Эта прана начала поглощаться или осознаваться как первая вибрация, надо.
You have been absorbed by nada and are beginning to approach the source of prana, that is, your higher self. That is, roughly speaking, you have slipped through this point bindu somewhere in the height of your higher self. And this correlates very well with yoga, with Patanjali mornings.
Своего высшего я. Вот. И это очень хорошо соотносится, скажем, с
In fact, this is the same process that is described in Yoga Patanjali, but only in a different language. More of this, you know, tantric nature. So, where did Misha put it? So, we still have time. All right, let's go, while Misha is running, questions on this part. And where? I remembered. Questions about this part. Part-time students, let's ask. Full-time students are also asked. So far there have been no questions. There are no questions. That's good. And here. Come on, you then, after the break, Roma. Let's do a great one. Question. Yes. Mind control. If the mind starts to freak out, then there was a method to clamp it between the two chakras below and above. But in the case of Enzina, how does this happen? Yes, look, it's actually happening very splendidly.
происходит
So, what do we have under Ajna?
под Аджной, что у нас?
Vishuddha. Vishuddhi, what kind of manifestation? Speech, mantra, vibration.
Мантра, вибрация.
Higher. What do we have? Beyond something out there, right. Bindak, transcendental, supreme intuition. Well, you know so. On the one hand, you hope for the highest. On the other hand, you mumble a mantra, or rather you shout obscenities. In direct proportion to how the mind is a miracle. Here. That is.
То есть,
Look.
смотрите,
The temple effect, friends.
эффект
The temple?
храма, друзья,
The
храм,
temple.
храм, эффект
The temple. There are temples on every corner in India. So, well, we have temples, are all orthodox these, as it is, religions.
этих самых, как его, религий.
Look, the temples survived. What they just did not survive. Well, yes, they were blown up there a little bit when these Bolsheviks came to power. But it wasn't all blown up, was it? Why do people walk? And why do people walk? It helps. And then, when in the 43rd year, when you know, this same Stalin, he was a wise man, he realized that this was a good topic. He led the royal shoulder straps, the ranks of generals, and legalized the church. Then the temple was restored in general according to the full program. Then they began to destroy them again for the second time. This is already under Khrushchev. Why? It works. It works. You don't know what to do.
Ты не знаешь, что делать.
Everything, my head is spinning. Parasitic thoughts have stuck to it.
Паразитические присосались к,
What is it called?
называется.
To emotions. You can't control your mind, you're freaking out more precisely. Well, in general, everything is weird. And you go, the next thing you do. You go, first of all, to a place where no one will interfere with you. In a good temple, as a rule, thick walls. Secondly, the whole atmosphere there is so appropriate.
Подобающее.
Thirdly, there you willy-nilly begin to think about the highest, to hope for a level above the Orzen chakra.
На уровень выше Аджна чакры.
On the other hand, what are you starting to do there? Mumble a prayer.
Бормотать.
And here you are with your mind clap, and caught between prayer and hope for the highest,
Молитва и упованием на
and allows and helps.
Ты помогай.
And generally speaking, temples should be built. Well, maybe they are not called temples there, like a meditation center or something else. On the same principle, I came, activated the speech center, activated the hope for the highest, plus, respectively. Well, what is there in any temple at all?
Плюс еще, соответственно, ну что там вообще в любом
This.
это
Yes, that's me, you know, I especially like. Unfortunately, I have not been to Germany. I've seen stained glass windows here in the Pushkin Museum. Oh, actually super. Plus organ music prompurum, tralalala. Yes, and it's like at a disco. Everything shudders. Yes, it's like this. Here. Plus the smell. So what's there to light up Femi, right?
там воскуривать, да?
And in general, according to the full program, if you decompose all the senses in one place, it turns out to be a very powerful way to work at once.
Вот и сразу.
And, as a matter of fact, all such rites, rituals, they, as a rule, come down to work at once, including us too. Here we have some practices. I give them on purpose sometimes to curb the insane minds of some students.
Безумные разумы некоторых студентов.
They are built on very competent principles, but if they are not given this, they themselves will not be able to cope with anything for a very long time. Here. So you understand, yes, that these are serious sciences. If only. The only thing I'm afraid of is that tomorrow someone will have a brothel there. Lisa, they will do something. Some new company for the seduction, a training company for someone, they will take something there for a lot of money. They will take out of context the yogic religious moments there and start rowing money on it. That's what I'm afraid of course, it's scary. Here. But you can't rake in a lot of money. You need a level above the Ajna chakra level, and as a rule, all dealers with this level have a club. Therefore, as a rule, from this level. That is, before that, you can build any kind of similarity, and if there is not there at the top, then the mind will break out. Here. But this is a separate topic. And in general they say, yes, yes, well, yes. There is an opportunity to clamp the Ajna chakra for good purposes. And sometimes, you know, when these who run into the attack, are they running to attack? What are they shouting? Hooray! He crossed himself and fell on the enemy. It's hard to run in silence. You yell like that. Okay. Okay then. He also sees a flame like the flame of a candle, glowing like the purest radiance of the morning sun, and burning between heaven and earth. Here Hadavan, Lord Paramashiva, manifests himself in the fullness of his all-pervading, omnipresent power. He is a witness of everything, knows no decline. He resides here in the same way as the region of the sun, moon and fire in the Sahastral. So, look here. And then what? Well, we figured out the level of reason, then what? This will be, as they say, in the next fairy tale of Scheherazade. You understand, right? We have 1,001 chakras. Seminar. Yes. So, we will really talk about this later. But the question, then what? Purely subjectively, this is perceived very well in Ananda Lohara, it is said. And here, by the way, now you can read Ananda Hari. Like a light without a light source.
Без источника света.
So, and there's more out there, finding this. Do you have any? Yeah. Right now we will count. That is, then the perception begins, as if, you know, the pure light of consciousness, not colored by anything, not a single thought form.
Ничем, ни одной мысли формой.
And this area of pure consciousness, or in yoga terminology, is Shiva.
Или в терминологии йоги это
Shiva is the male principle of pure consciousness. And you know, such a very beautiful symbolism.
символика.
By the way, it is described in the preface to the Maha Nirvana Tantra by John George Udruff. That you have a mountain of Kailasa in the top of everyone's head.
Кайласа,
Dazzling white, triangular shape, where Shiva resides.
где пребывает Шива.
And anyone who has looked at Kailasa at least once will undoubtedly achieve success in yoga. Do you know what a very interesting symbolism is? On the one hand, there is a very specific Mount Kailasa on the territory. So what do we have there now? China has it now. Well, in other words, it's not so easy to get there, first of all, because these are mountains and it's cold, and the Himalayas. And on the other hand, there are locals there too, so these are the same comrades. Well, really, I was told that if you know who is there. True, it was a long time ago, to give a bribe, then you can do anything, anything at all. And many pilgrims have made a pilgrimage, and it is very difficult to see at least once in a lifetime a group of Lhasa. It is considered to have seen Lhasa, and that's it, you can die. Yes, enlightenment is all provided for you. The pilgrims really go and look. A friend of mine was there recently. Here. But there is an allegorical level of Mount Kailasa, which is inside each head of your own. And in fact, initially it was understood that the mountain of Kaila is inside the head. Question. And then, why do some geographical places connect with purely physical places? The answer, friends, is absolutely cool. The fact is that to get to this place, like it or not, you have to make a lot of body movements. Very difficult ones. Previously, you had to walk, because there are no trolleybuses there, and helicopters did not fly. Now they fly and walk. And well, it stretched for a long time. Moreover, you climb higher and higher into the mountains. Oxygen shortage begins. With a lack of oxygen, you turn off all parasitic thoughts, believe me. Here you go higher, higher, higher. In other words, the whole route is designed so that with each step, the entire surrounding area, and everything that is done there, works as if you were doing practice. You got up, saw the image of Mount Kailasa. Your head is empty because you have no oxygen. Not that there are thoughts. There is nothing, but if before that you had a higher, well, as if striving for a higher. Then at this moment it is easier for you to put the principle of reason under control. That is, for this reason, friends, here is a warning. Unfortunately, fortunately, some yoga practices before us got this kind of instruction. That is, come to this cave, get naked. No clothes on yourself. And that's just go in there naked, do this, that, the 5th, the 10th will highlight. Moreover, you have to go to this place yourself. Anyway, starting with some point. And only then will it work. And if you start enjoying the benefits of civilization, like now in India, my God, you buy a helicopter for ridiculous money. Well, you rent, okay, right. Whiz. I flew in, looked, well, yes. I spent a couple of hours, well, yes. You didn't even have time, well, even their mountain sickness doesn't have time to start. And this is a necessary ingredient for practice, mountain sickness. Do you understand? At such a height. I looked around, paid and flew on. What have you learned there, not learned? Did you see this Kailasana, did you not see it? What's the difference? Therefore, here there is such, a very interesting difficulty, that you don't understand what to do verbatim. The Hindus, I must say, succeeded in this. They don't think much. It is said they do. And due to this, they retain knowledge. But the slightest correction, even on the part of the Hindus themselves, how everything flies to figs. Just everything flies to figs. And this makes it difficult to preserve rediscovered ancient knowledge, including practices such as sacred visits. Then there will be a trial, and the same situation. Then we read. Ananda Hari peace. No, let's finish reading this first, and then we'll talk about Andal Hari. This is an incomparable, delightful place to stay. Or no, I'm sorry, really Ananda Hari, we just touched the light of consciousness. Yes. I greet the Parashamha, the real one, who is in your open chakra. shining like 10 million suns and moons, and who is embraced on the left side by the supreme chit of the mind. When you worship him with devotion in a place that is beyond the sun, moon and fire, in a kingdom that is nothing.
Которое за пределами солнца, луны и огня, в королевстве, которое не освещено ничем и при этом затоплено светом.
Вот смотрите,
In a kingdom that is nothing, there is no light source, but at the same time, it is flooded with light.
но в то же самое время залито, затоплено светом.
That's how the light of consciousness comes from nowhere.
Свет сознания ниоткуда.
Here's how else to say that from your higher self, which is beyond time and space, into even structures about which we also can't say anything, gets into your consciousness. And where is the place through which it actually penetrates? And this is where these concepts are born, first of all, Bindu, and secondly, a place where there is no light source. But this is an indirect indication of the next Sahasrara chakra center. So, then we read that we are there. Next. This is the incomparable, delightful abode of Vishnu. The excellent Yajna places his prana here at the time of death and enters after death into this supreme eternal unborn bliss of the primordial Purusha, who was before the three worlds and was known by Vedanta. Yeah. Well, we have already talked about this in passing. This is in the yoga of dying. This is a separate topic. I don't want to touch it. Next. When the action is won, the good in all respects becomes part of his service at the DOS-like feet of his revered guru. Then above the Ajna chakra, he will see the image of the great nickname, Mahanada. And the scythe of speech will always be manifested in the lotus of his hand. In a great sound, it dissolves into the air. This is half of Shiva, in the form of a club-like. He is in all, calming, burning benefits, distracting fear, and giving manifested pure consciousness. Well, in general, one way or another, we commented on all these points related to the Ajna chakra, where, look, the light of consciousness shines most strongly and unclouded on the one hand, and on the other hand, the energy is the most subtle and malleable.
Энергия наиболее тонка и податлива.
As it says, Chit Shakti.
Чит шакти.
That is, in order for a thought to be born, any thought form, as if energy, should reflect on the consciousness of consciousness on energy.
Сознание сознания на энергию.
And that's how the creation of thought forms is born.
Творение мыслеформ.
The process of thinking.
Мышление.
So, and above this current, is pure consciousness.
А выше этого то.
Well, or there's another way, there's Brand. We'll talk about it. So wonderful. Next. Next. No, that's enough. That's enough. Questions? No questions asked. We go further. Part-time students ask questions. If something is not clear, do not hesitate. Yes. Lato Sazina is located between the eyebrows. His lord is Shukla Mahakala, and the goddess Hakini is two petals Ha and Ksha. Inside, there is an eternal Bija shining like an autumn moon. The wise who knows this never strives downwards anymore. There is the brightest sparkling light, kept secret in all the tantras. By contemplating it, the greatest success is achieved. So here it is again, and the light kept secret in all the tantras is the pure light of consciousness. Shiva on Mount Kailasa. I am the giver of liberation. I am the third lingam in the tour, in the ecstasy tour, and also the symbol of the thousand-petal lotus Sahasrali. Well, here in particular, there is such a link even to dream yoga. The fact is that Tuya. Tuya is the fourth state. In other words, we have a state of aging, a state of sleep with a dream, a state of sleep without dreams. And we're already taking turns jumping from one to the other. And there is a fourth state, the state of Turiya. You know how it is in chess, there is such a figure, a tour. Fourth from the middle. Chaturanga was the progenitor of modern chess. The game was called Chaturanga. 4 corners or 4 parts. I don't know how to translate there. So that's it?
Так вот,
The fourth state is a state higher than the state of sleep, wakefulness, and dreamless sleep and dreaming sleep.
и сна без сновидений, и сна со сновидениями. То есть
In other words, it's like the pure light of consciousness perceiving the universe.
чистый свет сознания, воспринимающий Вселенную.
And then,
Дальше.
the contemplation of his unity becomes like no wider. Next, the 2 channels Ida and Pingala are Bharana and Asan. In the space between them is Varanasi, where Nar is the sacred city of Shiva. It is said that Visvanatha, the Lord of the world, resides here. Friends, there is a city of Benares in India,
Город Бинарес.
or in a different way in Varanas, the most sacred place.
Священнейшее место.
The most sacred place, then, in terms of preserving ancient knowledge and so on.
Сохранение древнего знания.
And again, here we find symbolism, where geographical concepts are superimposed on the structure of our body.
Накладываются на устройство нашего тела.
In general, there is such a thing in India.
Вообще в Индии есть такая вещь.
Yes. They deify the confluence of 2 rivers Prag.
Слияние двух рек. Прояг.
Freyag is called.
Называется.
That is, where one river flows into another river. And for what reason?
По какой причине?
It's ubiquitous all over India, but also in particular, and yes, for the reason, look, here is the following explanation of how we will do.
Объяснение, как
So, we have the Ajna chakra and the central channel.
и центральный
But we also have a left and right channel, and a dipingal and auxiliary channel.
вспомогательный канал.
We have a central channel called Sushumna.
Называется сушумна.
When it starts working, as it is said, one is dead to the world. It is a state of supreme ecstasy, of supreme self, and when you do not react to anything outside at all. As soon as prana enters the central channel, that's it.
В центральный канал
The whole world disappeared, as if it had never existed.
никогда.
There is nothing at all with all the problems.
Вообще ничего нет.
And it opens up a completely phantasmagoric experience, which means being.
Бытия.
And here's the question, but how do we get prana there, so that it enters the central channel?
Чтобы в центральный канал вошла.
And here it is indirectly indicated that prana can be conducted through the Ajna chakra, since Ida Pingala Sushumna is connected there.
Ида Пингала Сушумна.
Left, right channel, and center channel.
И центральный канал.
And by competent manipulation of the left and right channels, it is possible to force prana to enter the central channel of Sushumna, after which the euphoric state begins, which I have already mentioned, compared to which all drugs are just about nothing.
Ни о чем.
And the comparison of Ida and Pingala is like to rivers that merge together and give entrance to a third invisible river.
Сравнение Иды и Пингалы как две реки, которые сливаются вместе и дают вход в третью невидимую реку.
Sometimes, you know, they say there, the invisible Saraswati River,
Река Сарасвати.
meaning, respectively. Or, let's say, Shiva has a trident.
Зубицу Шивы.
Well, what does it mean?
Что означает?
Here is one of such sacred explanations that these are Ida, Pingala, and the central channels. Here is the intersection point of them. Here. So, next. Then Harima? And did you print out this Ramakrishna? No. Well, what is it? Well, maybe find it somewhere, huh? On the phone. Let's find it on the phone. Which one is for us? No, but what do we have after that? Avalon, the serpent power. The process is ascending. My last mantra, is already on the chakra, in which there is a thin tarka and a curse. Finish it. So, count it again. The process goes back to the last center, the different chakra, in which there is a subtle tattva, the mind, and the curse. This chakra is so called because it receives instructions from the Supreme Guru. Between the eyebrows is this lot with 2 white petals, on which there are white letters ham, ham. All 50 letters end here. There are 50 petals and 50 in total in the 6 chakras. At the base of this lotus is the great mantra Om. Each lotus has 2 or 4 more petals than the one below it. And this already applies. And the same applies to the section of petals and the joke of the charm. Here is Paramashiva in the form of Hamsa, see Hakali, white Hakini Shak Shakti, rejoicing from drinking nectar. The inverted triangle of Yoni Trikon and Otara Lingam, shining like lightning to the located Trikon. There are 3 lingams in Muladhara, Anahata, Yasnachek. And here, in these nodes or Granhi Bras, the power of Maya is especially great. Here is also the place where the 3 groups of beats associated with fire, the sun, and the moon come together. The words about the opening of the doors refer to the coming through the Wilgranhas that are here. Cha, instead of the presence of subtle tattas, Mahata and Prakriti, and Takarana and Yagunami, that is, Buddhi, Chito and Ahamkara and his manas. In general, we can say that manas is a tattva ashna charka. Since this element, let me explain a little bit. Still, some such terms need to be clarified here. You see, Mudrav is hard to read. He immediately starts using Sanskrit without warning. If you don't know the meaning, and it's hard to read at all. Early, let's say this is it. Well, how to say it in Russian? How to say it in Russian? The level is the ego level. Ego level. That is, starting from what level this division into me or not me is going on. And as soon as the level on me or not me begins, then, of course, everything that relates to me is pretty. And everything that relates to her is someone else's and bad, if it does not like ourself. And here's how it would be like a single universe, imagine. Yes, a single universe. But we're taking a piece out of this universe, and this is me. But everything else is not me. And here is the remaining part. If it harms this piece, it is bad. Na. And if, on the contrary, to help it's good. You understand, right? And then basic emotions are born from this in the future. Fear, anger, envy, jealousy, lust, and all, right? Where does it start? From the level where you consider yourself to be what you are not and cling. That's where the whole song begins, in general. Here. But in the same way, remember, we talked with you when the frame floats on the ocean of the mind. The frame is floating, especially if the big frame is like this. You know, these portraits of tsars used to be painted like this. There are 2 meters, 3 meters there, yes. And the waves pass through the frame. Waves are thoughts. The frame is manas. Part of the waves passes, part does not pass. That is, something is filtered. Everything that has entered, passed through manas, and splashes inside the frame is buddhi. There are small waves inside the frame. So, from above, with a flashlight, it highlights what floats in the frame. It's clean. And he looks at what a good wave has floated. Each wave is a thought form. And it turns out that sometimes you can raise a big wave in the frame, and it comes out, and sometimes, on the contrary. A big wave through the frame, hop, and that means everything has already rattled. That is, sometimes such, quite good ones are given, well, as if rough bindings in explaining what each of the terms means. Then everything quickly, clearly falls into place, everything becomes clear, well, as if it were more or less logical. Next. Prit says, yes, tattva. Well, tattva, one of the possible translations of the word tattva, is suckness. Well, you know, this answers the question, why? And that's it. And that's it. That's how it's done. That's it. Yes. And, that is, it's some kind of, you know, quantum, or some kind of indivisible fundamental principle, or, as it were, basic, right. Here's tattva. Tattva of reason. We say the principle. I like the word principle more than tattva. Since it is a mental center, it includes all of the above aspects of the mind and the prakriti from which they originate, as well as the Atma in the form of the Kanava Om Bija. Here Antaraman sticks bright, vanishes bright as a flame. And what did you print there? Friends, you know, I'll tell you where these texts come from. It's someone who takes a book overnight, scans it, recognizes it was some kind of nice program, especially without reading what he recognized there, and throws it on the internet. Well, it can be even when printing out there was some kind of respect. No, well, it's unlikely. Still, I think it's earlier. The light of this region apparently does everything that is between the Malathara and the Brahmarana. By contemplating this lotus, Eden attains the powers of Siddha and becomes Advaita Karavadi. In this regard, the lotus Shah Chakra is Nirupana. In connection with this lotus Shah Chakra, Naruna explains how to achieve detachment with the help of her unwise. It is here at death that Ajna, placing in his right hand and entering into the Supreme, the true God of damage of the ancient world, who was originally before all three worlds and was known, saw. Well, here are a few words too, quite interesting. There is such a practice, very powerful, called yoni wisely. Do you know how to translate it like that? But it is as if you have re-entered the womb of the mother. Yoni, female reproductive organs. This is a rather complicated practice, kept secret in the tantric tradition extremely. It is mentioned in many texts. It consists in the fact that you close all the senses, do certain breathing exercises, and direct the mind accordingly into these structures connected with the Ajna chakra in order to somehow pop and get out of this world. And in general, it's quite an interesting result, but we need to talk about it elsewhere. In the same went, it is written. There is a truth in fact, something else. The other one, how can I tell you? Another explanation, it's more explicit. In general, there are actually a lot of such sexual symbols here, explicit sexual symbols. That is, it is necessary to mention it. The fact is that there are so-called sexual practices when a man, roughly speaking, enters a woman, having sex. If he does everything very correctly with his woman. And do you remember, yes, what he has to do there before that? To fall at my wife's feet, right? Here. Then, due to sexual practices, there is such a blockage of all centers that the Ajna chakra remains completely in a free state. And one small effort of will, you can translate sex into the highest samadhi. But again, you understand, the issue of sex is taboo even now. And these are quite specific practices on how to make a temple out of your bedroom, how to turn sex into a method of approach to superstates, how to perceive your wife as neither more nor less than the goddess Sri herself, who is higher than reason. That's all the rest especially. Symbolism is very difficult to understand. That is, they tell you this, if you don't know the background at all, everything at all. It's very difficult to understand what kind of practice is meant and how it works, what you have to show, tell, and so on so on. Next. In the same Chapin written method from this center, the subtle body, which in its individual form is called Teyes, and in the collective aspect of Ishvari, is deployed as the cause of concealment. Hiranyagarbha. Garbha. Hiranyagarbha. The golden seed. The seed. Well, by the way, and the analogy with the male seed is Garbha. The word Garka means seed. The latter term is also applied to the manifestation of the Paramatma of the Quran, as manifested in the Sutratma. And when it manifests through these two carriers without differentiation, it is known as Antaryaman.
Там проявляется посредством этих двух своих носителей без дифференциации, то он известен как антарьямин.
Well, again, I'm not going to do that here. Look, yes, that is, there is such a thing as an embodied soul, that is, as if the higher self, which considers itself to be something one, another, a third. Come on, this is a separate topic. Chakras are the bodily centers of the world of differential manifestation. The translation is no good. And with its subtle and dense bodies arising from the body, and with its three levels of consciousness, wakefulness, dreaming sleep, and dreamless sleep. Okay, that's enough. Let's read Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna. Yeah. It means that we have already read about his description in previous seminars, how he experienced this or that center. And that's all about Chuck. I plunged into even deeper meditations. I was in my prayers like a tiger ready to spring. Suddenly, I saw an image in front of me. I rushed forward. With one leap, I flew into the sixth valley, Tulya Valley. There I was near my beloved. I could see and hear him in the next room. Only a thin partition separated the soul from itself. At last I knew that I had entered the house of unity. Well, there really is. The fact is that the image for Ramakrishna is a personified image of the Absolute, through which he comprehended. It was, among other things, the goddess Kalib. That is, and here rather. And look, it's like that. Well, even in a different way, you know, as in the yoga of falling in love. You feel the presence of your beloved, or your beloved there. It would be better to say, well, if we are talking about Ramakrishna. And here he is, the goddess Shri is nearby. And it separates it quite a bit. And this is the state experienced when, well, strictly speaking, one has reached the level of the Ajna chakra. The next leap is into union, into samadha. And here you are already everything, already, well, as if everything is already. You begin to feel this higher. That is, not through reason, but directly. Here. So that's it, yes we have. That's it. So wonderful, friends. We're going to have some practice now. We have time left though. A little bit. A little bit, yes. And will we rest, will we not? Yes. We're walking now, so we're resting a little bit. That is, before 9, before the 10th. So, look. Well, we'll have time, we'll have time. Everyone, let's rest. Yes, we rest a little bit, and then practice. And if it's also there with mantras, yantras. This is very promising. Okay, well, okay. So, look at what kind of practice there is, but, unfortunately, we don't have time for it, but I have to voice it. This is when you place your finger at the point between the eyebrows, inhale through one nostril, exhale through the other. Concentrating on the point between the eyebrows. And so, in turn, back and forth, back and forth. Here is one of the exercises. And then, on the inhale, do a kumhaka delay. The stomach is inflated, the gaze with consciousness. And with the tongue is directed upwards. That is pure mind. It fills, resembles a flame. Above, it is half the moon, and above it is the letter Ma before the manifestation of Makar in the form of a dot. And even higher it is necessary, whose whiteness is the same as the whiteness of the Deva ball or the moon. And the moon. That's the next question. It describes about the moon, or rather half of the moon above it. That's where the first person says it's Maya. And above the mind it turns out Maya, above the letter, as a manifestation of the Bindu point, well, it's already necessary there. And second, it's a person who just says that it's actually described by the Om sound. Well, like how Om is drawn, it is drawn. So it's just, well, as if the Bindu is placed at the top. Oh friends, well, you questions ask. I hardly understand it and less. You see, you swung wow. I don't even know what to say. I do not know, friends, unfortunately, here I am. In general, both had such arguments. I think they are both right in their own way. Yes, friends, no. And I don't see what the difference is there. I don't see it either. Do you understand what a dispute can be? Do you know what was the first time when there was no time? Or what was on the left, what was on the right, in a place where there was no space? That is, some points, you have to understand, they are allegorical. And here is the degree of allegory, it is needed for what? In order to completely get attached from abstraction to at least some specifics. Well, here it is. And that's why, to be honest, I am. No, we need to reflect, think. Maybe there really is a very deep symbolism there, but by God, I give up, I give up, I give up. Not today. No. We have everything. We have an open university. There are departments there. We have a bright future. Oh, it's a job for them. That's the job for them. The student who does not surpass the teacher is bad. I want to become old, toothless, stupid. In an old man like that, you know that Vlad is like that. So I'll be on you. Visit the Kundalini pulpit on Thursdays. That's it. Come on, fill up your pulpit. Okay, all right. Questions, friends, there is very little time. Who has what? And in touch, let's ask. There is nothing. Everything is unclear. Don't be scared, me too. Well, what? Yes, please. And Bendu, is she still somewhere? In this chakra or somewhere higher up there? This is the topic of the next seminar. So, who else has what? Hooray! That's it for everyone. I realized, already inside, after all, at the intersection. By the way, we want to tell you, young man, about. Or, after all, it's spreading. Because there are some descriptions such as crows, chakras like funnels. No, well, there are a lot of descriptions. There are like lotus flowers, like funnels, like whirlwinds, whatever there is. That is, it's perfect. That is. And what kind of remark is there, right? Yeah. The biologist's point of view. And what's there? Yes, the third one. Yeah. Well, that's what it means. Ivan Efremov discovered the third eye. Yeah. But this, generally speaking, is not a secret. All adjacent ones, even those who now live, have lizards. A quickie and ordinary green ones. Stayed. They have a diamond shape. Yeah. But they have a slightly different structure of the skull. They have it looking up. That is, it's not between the eyebrows, but almost like the top of the head. No, the thing is, there's a skull there during evolution over there. Yes. Yes. And it means that there really is this place in the skull, there is a hole there. In some reptiles, it means that it is tightened only by the skin on top. And indeed there is a light-sensitive organ. If we talk about a person, then evolutionarily it is homologous to such a gland in the brain as the epiphysis. Epiphysis he. So, can we quickly include this device of the human brain in Wikipedia, so that you can see where it is? That it is a very interesting hormone called melatonin. Melatonin, it is responsible for circadian rhythms, for sleep and wakefulness. Yeah. Here, its antagonist is serotonin, or it is also called stress hormone. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to tell you more deeply, because I'm not an anthropologist, but here's what I remember, let's say. But for others, accordingly, in the wind of evolution, it is as if it is already a skull, already completely overgrown, submerged, inside the brain of the gland from the reptile. Yes, I heard. These are birds and respectively. No, people did not come from reptiles, let's say, more from amphibians. I see. Here, but the bottom line is that others have this gland, it is immersed in depth. And they have to the surface, right? That is, either perception. Well, I also read that the perception of light. Well, that is, as if that. That's if you're there who? Well, imagine, yes, a dinosaur or someone. You look down, and the danger may be from above. As soon as the shadow found. Sometimes there is such an explanation. In general, it is very interesting. But the most important thing is that it is really connected with such very deep structures of the brain. Completely ancient and archaic. And of course well, have you found it, right? Well, something. Maybe. Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact. Structure. And well, more I am now. Can it be increased? No, some kind of bad picture, small. We're going to remove it now. The trouble with the mouse. And what's the trouble with the mouse? Isn't she there? Well, yes. No. Well, take it from there, from this. So, nowhere. In the center. It's almost in the center is also called a bump. I showed it. That's it. Come on, somebody. Right here. Chick. No, wait. It's written nowhere, but where? Here. Here I am, mice. Here it is, can't you read this? It's kind of a talent. Read? What is it called? Epiphyse corpus. And that's it. Painep. Epiphysis, or the case of Painep. That is, the central apple, as it is. Where did it go? And these? Clearly, it's not even an apple of us. In COVID, in our terminology, yes. Well, actually, on the contrary. In theory, on the contrary. Yes, in theory. In theory, it looks like a point. It is finding somewhere that is connected with the point of the window. But this is at the next seminar. I will tell you one interesting thing. Rather, yes, it seems to me that it is more likely not according to talent. Here he will see everywhere. And the one like Bendu rather swims. Well, here is this complex bunch of everything at all. And we're going to climb, I think. No, friends, you remember, yes, yoga is not a substitute for science, yes. But you understand that we do not have to realities, and what science discovers should not contradict. And both. Do you know how it is here, too? On both sides. Therefore, Kanya. Again, what do I require of all students? Friends need to, remember, yes, sharpen their minds, be smart, get an education, including this information. What is a very bad impression, I remember, I was made by one, let's call him a guru. When the conversation went on for a long time, it went on there. Well, not a conversation there. In one place he is there so to speak, and then he writes. Well, generally speaking. Back in the 19th century, scientists learned how to get living organisms from inanimate matter. After that, well, somehow the belief that he was talking about yoga started a little bit. Yes, disappear. Okay, great. Great point, thank you very much, great. So, who else has what? Nobody has anything. So look, friends, what am I asking of you? Review. Please visit the website. Especially those who are not physically here, but via the internet. So, write at least so that there is feedback. Because when a physical person came, he didn't like it, he spat and left. And it's immediately clear I didn't like it. But who is in touch, it's not clear at all. Therefore, I ask for your feedback on this seminar. Place it on our courses, on the website of the Chakra Open Yoga course, less than Earl greater than. There is a section of reviews for lectures, seminars, retreats there. Please write. Not the same thing. And something there on Twitter, on social networks, this is already advertising, so that others can find us. Wonderful, friends. Are there any questions in touch? What are they doing there? Writing? What? That? Nothing. Don't write. Quiet. Everyone, friends, I congratulate you. We have, as they say, considered Ajna Chakra in the first approximation. Hooray! I am Vadim Open Yoga. This is our festival on the Black Sea. Our 2 yoga classes considered are reading aloud. Yoga is writing. This is, as it were, the third part of our presentation. And let's